I'm Bobby Wrinkle. I want to welcome you to Evening Upstairs at your library. Who remembers purchasing Levi jeans from Paducah Dry Goods? Did you know there was a dry goods on the same location before Paducah Dry? And what other history did the driving force behind the founding of Paducah Marineways bring with them? Join us tonight for a glimpse into Paducah's rich history. Our speaker is author of the respected Coca-Cola collectible books and other books. He's an avid collector, as you all can see, and a Paducah historian. He is past president and current board member at the Market House Museum. Let's welcome our guest, B.J. Summers.
Thank you all. I hope to be able to live up to that. Before we get started on the program proper tonight, let me have your attention for just a minute. Tomorrow we will celebrate Veterans Day in this country. It's a day, 1 out of 365, whenever we say thank you to the vets who have given 365 days, sometimes times 2 and sometimes times 30, defending the freedoms that we have. So if you know a veteran tomorrow or tonight on your way out of here, tell them thank you. And just out of my curiosity, how many veterans do we have in here? Folks, give them all a hand. Thank you. Tonight, we're going to be looking at home movies. I know that'll thrill everybody sitting here. When I got to thinking about a program, I thought, well, you know, we have all heard about different names in Paducah, but do we know what picture to put with them? Do we know what a face would be if they were to walk up and talk to you on the street? So the first one that we're going to look at here, and by the way, if he walks up and looks at me on the street, I'm going to go the other way. That guy was Adolphus Owen, and he was the 5th child of Valentine and Elizabeth Walter Owen. They had 9 kids. He was the 5th in that line. That'd be tough to be right in the middle, wouldn't you? You got all the hand-me-downs, and I remember my brother and I were forever doing that. It's tough. Anyhow, he left Paducah. He was the first person to sign up for the Confederacy here. Unfortunately, he didn't get to come back to Paducah. He was killed May the 6th, 1864, and he was killed at the Battle of the Wilderness in Virginia. Next person that we're going to look at, probably you have heard his name, and if I would imagine most of you know what he looks like up there. That is Colonel Quintus Quincy Quigley. And I'll tell you, I can't say that real fast. It just won't work. He was one of the prominent older families in Paducah. He was one that in 1858, along with a few more, comprised the Board of Trustees, and they introduced the wharfage ordinance, bringing goods into Paducah and the way to tax them down there. He was also Paducah's first city attorney, and he took that job only at the urging of his friends. He never had another public office, didn't want another public office. He was, by all accounts, an excellent an attorney. I read his book. He wasn't much on writing, although I think that was one of his relatives that wrote it. But it was a good book. You just have to be willing to take your time. He was the second of 8 kids, and he was educated at Cumberland College, and he started on a study of law at the age of 19 in Tennessee under a judge, J.W. Crockett. And over in the part of Tennessee he was from, that could well have been some of the Crockett family that we've all heard of over there. In 1852, he married Mrs. Mary E. Husbands, and we all have heard of Husbands Road, and that the Husbands house was out there at one time on the Husbands Road, and there was also a time when it was sitting on Broadway. So Mr. Quigley had a good long life as a lawyer. Now, this one is a familiar name. How many of you are familiar with this person and what he did and why we know him? He caused an awful lot of trouble in Paducah back in the early 1900s. This is Laredo Taft. I like that name, Laredo. Laredo was born in Elmwood, Illinois. He was an American sculptor, writer, and an educator. He died in, well, he was born in 1860. He died in 1936. He was the father of Representative Emily Taft Douglas. He was the father-in-law to her husband, Senator Paul Douglas, and he was a relative of President William Howard Taft. That guy had connections all over the place. Right there is a piece of work that some of you may not have known that he did. That is called The Fountain of Time, and it's from a poem that a man wrote, and he's saying, you tell us that time is passing. I say, no, time is not passing. We're the ones that's passing. And it took him 12 years to build that, and it's got water that's flowing through up there in the front of it. A pretty nice looking piece. Chief Paducah got moved from down at front of the old custom house because everybody was afraid it was going to get hurt down there. It did get moved some by the 37 flood, so it was moved out onto the boulevard on Jefferson, where it has been hit 3 or 4 times by a car. Right there was one of the better shots that I'd seen of it. Hit it, knocked it sideways and askew somewhat, and the guy driving it did get to go put some time in for the city of Paducah. Chief Paducah, however, still stands majestically on the Broadway, and there is still a lot of debate among people about the fact that Paducah was named or was not named after Chief Paducah, and that's not one of those things that I'm going to get in the middle of tonight because that'd take all night long. Our next guy, you all might remember. Anybody know Charles Reed? I bet Jack. Yeah. Charles Reed was born in Paducah, 1842. He went to public school until he was 12 years old, and then he quit school and worked as a tobacco apprentice. And 6 years after he left school, Civil War showed up. He enlisted in the 3rd Kentucky Regiment with Lloyd Tillman. He fought at Shiloh, the siege of Harrisburg, and Corinth. And then the last 3 years, when he didn't have Tillman, he fought with Forrest. He rode with Forrest, and he participated on all of Forrest's raids in Kentucky and in Tennessee. So Reed was pretty busy in the saddle during the Civil War. He, at the end of the war, he came back to Paducah, his hometown, but he came back absolutely broke. Not a penny to his name, like a lot of others during that Civil War time. But he had a lot of friends here. And one of the friends that he had was John Sigenfelter, who not only ran a pharmacy, but he also had a pretty good bottle of whiskey, I'm told. And so he was doing all right, and him and Mr. Reed went into the hotel business together, and they opened up the European Hotel. Charles Reed was, from all accounts, a hard worker, and in 1876 he purchased half of the Richmond House. And the Richmond House at the time was one of the fanciest hotels in town. And as Mr. Reed was working on being a success there, he also ended up being part of the people who built the Palmer House, which far outnumbered any of the other houses in town. Everybody wanted to go to the Palmer House. He stayed there for 16 years, good long time after going through the Civil War. And he was a city councilman. He served as a mayor for over 4 terms. And according to everything I've read in Paducah history, he was probably one of the best mayors for that time. He managed to get more done than any of the other mayors, they claim, in that period. He married a Jessie B. Woods in 1868, who was the daughter of the late Captain Eli Woods. So we've got Mr. Reed there. Next, who has heard of this guy? If you take a guess, you probably are going to get this one right.
He was on that spoke factory in Louisville.
Absolutely, he did. And this guy was from Tennessee. He was a successful spoke manufacturer in Tennessee, but he ended up selling out to his brother in 1895, and he moved to Paducah. He bought 60 acres on the southeast corner of the city. Now, that is over there about where the NC and St. L Junction comes in. My mom, who grew up here all her life, and she didn't go back all the way to the Civil War, but she is 91. And she told me that she used to live over on Tennessee Street. I said there was a huge hall over there. I said most of it's been filled in, and you can go over there today and see where a lot of that hall is still at. But that was one of the little sticking points in Mr. Little's factories over there, because he had to be able to get from his property, take a shorter way to get down to the river. He had rail over there, but he needed to get to the river. So he convinced the city of Paducah to go in halves with him. And he put up half of what it took to fill in enough of that ravine to put a road in there, and the city put up the rest of it. Pretty good thinking on his part. And he ended up with the Illinois Central Depot over there. The city wasn't that wild about that piece of town, but you know, Mr. Little had one of the largest brick kilns in the country over there. He also had the largest stave factory in the country, and it was known as the Hiram Plow Stave Company. The Little Spoke Factory, which was his. There was a big sawmill over there. Streetcar line ran out there. They had electricity, city water. And at its peak, the Little Spoke Factory could produce 15,000 spokes a day. In 1902, Mr. Little married Gertrude Rossner, and they were members of the Methodist Church, and he was a steward down there. He was also a member of the Elks, the Maccabees, and the Hoo-Hoo Club Lodge. How many of you in here know what the Hoo-Hoo Lodge is? And by the way, the Hoo-Hoo Lodge is still in operation. The Hoo-Hoo Lodge was it was a fraternal organization that was for people whose trades were lumber concerned. In other words, if you were making spokes, you were probably going to be a member of the Hoo-Hoo Lodge. And their international headquarters today is over in Arkansas. So Mr. Little did very good. 1906, that plat right there was registered with the city. He had, by that time, built over 30 small houses over there for the people who worked for him. So he was a fairly ambitious man, and Littleville has seen better times and worse times, and it looks like they're coming back over there right now. So always glad to see that. This next guy, all of you, I'm sure, have heard his last name, Paxton. This is William Francis Paxton. He was one of the original Paxtons. He came to Paducah in 1869 and read law with Thomas Moss. Thomas Moss also was captain in the Civil War and happened to be an attorney. In 1871 to 72, Mr. Paxton was Deputy United States Marshal, and he was in charge of busting illegal stills and breaking up bottles of moonshine, which I'm sure made it awful popular. After his term there, he organized the Citizens Savings Bank in 1888. He served as president of the Paducah Cooperage, and that is the people who was out on North 8th Street, and they made barrels. They make barrels for whiskey, they make barrels for, or what they call hogsheads, for tobacco to be put in and rolled. I don't know how they rolled them down to the river without going in the river, but they managed to make it somehow. So he was a member of that organization. He was also a member of the Scott and Smith Tobacco Company, and that was the same Smith who was mayor of Paducah back in the early 1900s. He was treasurer of the F.W. Catterjohn Construction Company. Catterjohn is one of those names that's been around Paducah for a long time. He also bought a gravel pit in Greenville, and he did that because he couldn't find the type of gravel down here that was needed for some of the concrete. So he bought that up there, and with that type of gravel, the F.W. Catterjohn Construction Company flourished because now they could put the right type of gravel into their concrete and into their cement. Of course, he was involved with the Sun Publishing Company. He was a stockholder and director of the Paducah Light and Power Company and of the Lack Singletree Company. A whole lot of fingers in one pie and a bunch of pies right there. He got married in 1873 and had 7 kids. And if I went through the list of that, all of you would probably recognize at least 1 or 2 of them because they have been around here for a while. All right, let's look at another guy that did real well by Paducah. This is Joseph L. Friedman. Mr. Friedman was born in Louisville, and he went to school up there, went to college up there. His family was fairly well off, so he was able to get a fairly good education up there. And he persuaded his father, he's a pretty slick talker. He had been selling, after he got out of school, he'd been selling whiskey for Bernheim Brothers. And he moved to Paducah to create a vinegar company. And if you look over there, I've got a glass of Joseph Friedman's vinegar company and a picture over there that he put out. He talked his father into moving from Louisville down to Paducah and into investing into the vinegar business and then into running the vinegar business. So he had to be an awful good salesman because I'll tell you, I couldn't have gotten away with that. He did find time in 1886 to marry Elizabeth Cuyler, who's also another one of those names that we've all heard about in Paducah. Elizabeth's brother was J.W. Cuyler, and we're going to talk about him here in just a minute. they have been listed as being, lost my thing. They've been listed as being distillers. And I bring that point up because I was asked at one talk about where they distilled whiskey here. The fact is they didn't distill whiskey in Paducah. It's listed on there. I believe it's listed right there probably that they do. They own part of a distillery up in the central part of Kentucky. What they actually were was rectifiers. They would buy different brands from a distillery. They would ship it down here to Paducah, and then they would blend from one label to another label until they got up the taste of a whiskey that they liked. Their by far best brand was that of Brook Hill, and you can still see Brook Hill signs stuck around Paducah a lot of times, and that was their golden chain. That was the thing that made them most of their money. So I don't remember who asked me that, but they didn't distill here. They just had part ownership in a distillery. Mr. Friedman also built the Kentucky Theater, and at the time that was a going concern. They had a lot of live entertainment in there, and it was I forgot the amount of people that it would hold, but it was an enormous amount for what I thought downtown Paducah would ever be up to getting. Something like 1,200 people could be seated in that place. Now, I'm sure that it was redone several times because I remember seeing the Kentucky Theater or a picture of it, and it was way too small to hold 1,200 people, but according to everything that I have read, you could squeeze 1,200 people into that. Mr. Friedman also had an interest in the Smith & Scott Tobacco Company. There was another one of those pies where there was some more people in Paducah being involved in it. He not only did that, but he was involved in the East Sutherland Company, who put out, this was their big brand, is Lax Fox. And probably you don't have to know exactly what it was in order to figure out what that term was for. But that was one of their best brands, and there's a box and a bottle up here. I don't recommend taking it, but it's up here, and they did do very well in that. And an interesting note here, I thought probably shows how bright I was, but I thought when we were having trouble getting stuff imported in here from China, Mexico, and all that it was something of a new thing that just came along. This was back in the early 1900s. All of the offices and the shipping department was in Paducah, and you can still see a sign down at 11th and Jefferson where that building sits that's got Pudilax on the back of it. But all of this was made in Mexico. It made in Mexico and shipped up here for just that purpose. So, that stuff of shipping stuff in was nothing new. Next guy we're going to talk about, you're going to recognize the name, and that's John William Cuyler. He actually wasn't born in Paducah either. He was born in St. Louis. And his father and mother were not born in this country. His father was born in Germany. His mother was born in England. He came to Paducah around 1886 and opened his own whiskey business, the John W. Cuyler and Company. And later he became the junior partner with J.L. Friedman in the Friedman-Cuyler Company. He was president of the Paducah Brewery, which sat over there on Monroe Street. He was vice president, here we got another finger in another Paducah pie, of the Palmer Hotel Company. he had large real estate holdings. He bought up a lot of real estate around Paducah. He was a member of the Mason Scottish Rites and the 32nd degree. J.L. Friedman, I just told you, married Elizabeth Kyler. That was his sister. He married Blanche Friedman, J.L. Friedman's sister. And they had 2 children, and one of them was a son, Leo F. Kyler, who I'm sure most of you in here have heard about or heard stories about. And they had a daughter also, Mrs. Thomas May, and she lived most of her life up in St. Louis. Anybody ever know that guy? Probably not, but his wares are just about as famous now as they were whenever he was putting them out. That is J. Andy Bauer. He started out working in life as a laborer in the hired shipyards up in Louisville. And he spent about 6 years as a laborer in those shipyards before he decided there was a better life for him someplace else. So his brother John Bauer had a pottery going in Louisville, and Andy went to work for him. And he stayed up there and worked for him for a while, and then Andy decided that maybe life could be better if he wasn't working for his brother. So he showed up in Paducah, and he bought a small pottery down here from a man by the name of Frank Parham, and he started his own pottery business. His location was at 7th and Trimble Street, which actually is Park Avenue now. And he took up the whole block over there. He had a thriving concern. He was very good about looking into new ways to mix his pottery and new kilns and way to heat his stuff. And so before he had been here very long, he had 75 people working over there on that corner. And he also kept people on the road selling his stuff. One of the biggest buyers of his pottery was the whiskey business. They were forever buying stoneware to put their whiskey in. And I have got a small J.A. Bauer crock sitting right over there. Those are awfully hard to find. And that one has got 2 labels on it, which makes it even more difficult to find. On the back side of it, it says TPA, Savannah, Georgia. It's got a date on it. Anybody know what TPA stood for? That's the Travelers Protection Agency. That was a forerunner of the AAA. Yeah. So they had a little nip jug right there that they probably gave out to their better people. You know, they put a little bit in there and give it to their better customers to make their customers even more happy with them. This next guy, right there you go. This next guy, I know everybody in here has heard of, knows something about him. Is there anybody in here that doesn't know about the Wallersteins? I didn't think so. Yeah.
I'm not from Paducah.
Well, the Wallersteins were an amazing amazing family. Herbert L. Wallerstein was born in 1885, and he died in 1980, 95 years old, pretty good life. And in between, he left an indelible mark on the city of Paducah. He assumed control of what used to be called the Oak Hall Clothing House, which was originally started and located in the Richmond House Hotel, which was sitting at the corner of First and Broadway. Now we have a beautiful parking lot there. Herbert assumed control of the clothing house in 1939 after his father died. And his father and his brother originally started that together. It was his father's name was Jacob, and he died in '39. Bill Powell, a longtime writer from around here, said that he promoted Paducah every day of his life. He was big on clothes. He wanted to sell a bunch of clothes, but he also promoted Paducah a lot. A local insurance agent said, and I quote, if he thought it was good for Paducah, he was for it. He was one of the leading movers in getting there's this half of the building that he was in when he sold out. There's his brother. I didn't want to short his brother on this. Milton was in business after his father died also, and the two brothers, I don't know how they got along. My brother and I probably couldn't get along in the same building for just a whole long time. Is my brother in here tonight? Anyhow, Herbert was big on civil and community affairs. And one of the big things that he did that everybody liked him for was he managed to get the toll taken off of the Brookport Bridge, which is now known as the Irving Cobb Bridge, because when they built that bridge, there was a toll booth on it. You had to pay your toll before you could cross that thing. So, and let's just say that Mr. Wallerstein, although he was always after something that was good for Paducah, people over there didn't like paying a toll to come over here to shop. And he had a business. He was a merchant. So as a merchant, he said, I got to get the people in town, you know. So he went after the toll bridge, and he managed to get it cleared up where he didn't have it, that toll. Irving S. Cobb originally bought his first pair of short pants and his first pair of long pants from Mr. Wallerstein, and Mr. Wallerstein said, yes, absolutely, that is the truth. He was also a prolific, right there's the man himself, H.L. Wallerstein. There's a pamphlet over there that's got a couple of his sheet music pieces in it. He was a prolific songwriter during his younger days, and he always kept sheet music, I'm told, underneath the counter in case there was an opportunity to promote his sheet music. It got so good that there was a man by the name of D.E. Wilson that we're not talking about tonight, but Mr. Wilson was living down around Fulton. He was a good piano player, and he managed somehow to be talked into coming to Paducah. Mr. Harbor, who had Harbor Department Store right behind the Wallerstein's building, was talked into giving him a little floor space where he could sell sheet music and sell pianos. Good piano player. So there we've got Herbert selling sheet music, and right out the back door, a guy playing the piano. So, you know, whenever your staff wasn't really busy, you could be over there doing other things that you enjoyed doing a lot better. Sam Sussman, who was a longtime Wallerstein employee, said that Mr. Wallerstein was the perfect boss. I didn't realize those existed, but said he was a perfect boss and one of the finest gentlemen who ever lived. So that is that part of the Wallerstein story. And Jack Paxton, who died several years ago in a plane crash out here, said he could go into the Wallerstein store and just to buy a suit, and the next thing he knew, they had been talking for an hour, and he was on his way out the door, and he did happen to have a suit under his arm, but that came second to all the rest of the stuff that they talked about. So that right there was H.L. Wallerstein in his younger days. Anybody know him? Now, right there is a guy that put a bunch of money into the coffers of Paducah. Somebody, I bet Jack or, you don't, that is Mr. Charles H. Markham. Mr. Markham, if you drive up Kentucky Avenue and look right in front of the where the Illinois Central shops are, and look in front of the offices there, there's a statue right there. And the statue is to Mr. Markham, and it was dedicated to him because he's the one who was responsible for bringing the Illinois Central into, well, not bringing them here, but boosting them up the way he did. He was the one who put the great big roundhouse out there. He was the one who extended a lot of the lines. He was a railroad man his whole life. He was devoted to several different railroads. And there is a picture of what the shops pretty close looked like back when I was a kid, because my grandmother and granddad lived across Kentucky Avenue from the shop, so I got to sit out there and smell the coal all the time. And the people of Paducah really liked Mr. Markham. They ended up doing a song for him, and they played it the first time on Mr. Markham Day over at Noble Park. Everybody, I've been told everybody who worked for the Illinois Central got rides over to the park. They had free eats, free drinks. They had games for all the kids to play, and that song right there, "We Love You, Mr. Markham," was what was written in his honor. I happen to know a woman in Paducah who, according to a piece of paper that I read not long ago, said she was an institution because she had played the organ at the Grace Episcopal Church for so many years. She also plays a good piano, and she said, "Yeah, I remember playing that. It was a real fancy two-step." And so I talked to a couple of the people here at the library, and I said, "I think I'll just get her to come up here and play the piano." And they both said, "All right, but you're going to have to get the piano upstairs, and then you're going to have to take it back." So that pretty well threw water all over that. And I said, "Well, never mind then." Right there is the statue that I was talking about being right in front of the office buildings down there. Does anybody remember this guy's name? Yeah, Charles GUSTAV VAHLKAMP. He was born in St. Louis, and he graduated from the Educational Institute in St. Louis, and then he went to, and only my possum trot pronunciation will probably fall out on this one, he went to the VAHLKAMP Institute of Fermentology in Chicago and graduated in 1902. He went to school just to learn how to ferment the stuff that you needed to ferment. He brewed in St. Louis for 2 years, and then he came to Paducah in 1909 to assume the management of the Paducah Brewing Company. And he was such a success at it, he also saw the antiquated equipment that they had down here to work with. He took it out, put new stuff in, and the place was kicking brew out constantly, doing very good, right up until 1919, and then they had that great big building over there with all sorts of money tied up in it, and the board of directors said, "We got to do something about this." So they did. They quit brewing beer and started shuffling milk out the door. That became city consumers who were putting out the famous Goldblum brand. I know you're going to recognize this next one. There is one of the beers that they put out, and incidentally, I've got one of those beer bottles with a paper label on it. Man, they're hard to come by. Anybody got one they want to throw away? I'll take it. Who's that? I know somebody in here knows her. That is Miss Mary Wheeler. Miss Mary Wheeler was, you could say that she was born to be a woman of leisure, but she didn't turn out that way. She was born on Kentucky Avenue, right on the corner of 5th Street. She claimed that she grew up overlooking the Ohio River. And how could she not play music if she was sitting right here, always seeing that river? I don't know what the river had to do with music, but she did. She was here until she was about 5 years old, and then her father, who we'll talk about in just a minute, was elected to go to Washington. And her opportunities were greatly improved when she left Paducah and went to Washington, D.C. And she was up there while her father served, I believe it was 3 terms in the House of Representatives. After he left the House of Representatives, he ran for Senate and didn't make it that far. So Mary went on to Chicago to educate herself even more in music. And after she left there, she went to become a person with a degree in musicology. Didn't know there was such a thing, but there you have it. She was supporting herself while she was going to school in Chicago by singing in what they call fancy cabarets and salons, not saloons, salons. When World War I interrupted her career, she went to working for the Red Cross, and Red Cross put her in what they called the hut service, where she was taking care of wounded and convalescing soldiers, singing for them. And when she left after the end of World War I, for some reason she decided to document music of the Appalachian area. So she went up and down the creeks and hollows up there on mules and with her zither. And that is it right there. And if you look, she's got a little piece of wood in one hand, and she's got a feather with a quill left on it in the other hand that she played. It was I'm sorry, it wasn't a zither, that's a dulcimer. She had it specially made, only had 3 strings on it. And there's another showing that, that little quill feather a little bit better. There is what Mary looked like when she was in high school. We'll get to him in a minute. When she was asked why on earth she decided to go through the mountains, and when she got back from the mountains, she decided she wanted to learn all about the roustabout music, the river music. And come to find out that as I was reading some about this, the roustabouts were required to stand out on the main deck of the paddle wheelers when they were leaving port and sang either a spiritual or a hymn to liven up the crowd on the bank that was watching them. So I guess Miss Mary decided that was a good place to be, and she enjoyed that. She did have a great a great source of the river songs. Somewhere up here, there's 2. There's one of her albums and one of her 45s. Her father was Charles Kennedy Wheeler. He was born in Christian County, but he went to the Military Academy in Hopkinsville, another one of them things that you learn whenever you're just looking around. Didn't realize there was a military academy up there. He came to Paducah and partnered up with Judge Campbell in 1886. And he served as a Paducah Corporation Counsel until 1896. And then he was elected to go to Washington. So he married Miss Mary Guthrie in 1888, and that was the daughter of another famous Paducan, J.J. Guthrie, who also owned a clothing store in Paducah. Now, not only did he own a clothing store, but he also worked for Wallerstein's as one of their clerks. So I guess he was double dipping in the clothes there. I'm not really sure. Okay. Can you guess what the age of that is? 37, absolutely. Can you figure out where it's at?
10th and Broadway.
Huh?
10th and Broadway. Where the
It is 10th and Broadway. Now that little building right there used to be, the railroad used to be there to stop traffic. The building across the street where it says Jones,
Cafe.
Jones Cafe. And right there is the man who ran that cafe. That's his wife. That's Vera. She also helped run that cafe. There are the 4 Jones boys. Okay, Jack, can you tell me what? Can you tell me?
John, Albert, Pete.
Got one? Well, you got them in there. I mean, they're all. Starting on my left, right. Pete Jones owned the Dixie Bar. John Jones was next to him. He's the one that ran the restaurant at 11th and Broadway. Albert Jones is the one standing next to him. Doesn't look like Albert now, but that's Albert Jones. And he also owned the Dixie Cafe. Jim Jones, the one on the far side, for some reason went to Cincinnati and opened up a restaurant. But that was in the real early days.
Pete wasn't Jones, he was a Yanis. He didn't change his name, the rest of them changed their name.
Well, that was what Albert gave me as being Jones. So, and right there is Albert Jones today. Albert is an attorney. After he got out of the military and the Korean War, his biography says that he went to law school. He also taught night school out at PJC before it would become PCC. And today he is working for Bryan Law Firm.
His Bob's roommate in college was Albert.
I asked somebody one time about college roommates, and it was a person, I'm not going to mention his name, but the roommate was a Marshall County judge at that time, Mike Miller. And I heard more tales, and it was one of those things where before it was over with, I thought, man, I should have never brought this up. Our next person, name is Thomas Waller. How many of you in here know him? All right, yeah.
Water went real fearful.
Huh?
Water went real fearful.
Absolutely. Thomas Waller was an attorney. He started out in Morganfield, and somebody in Morganfield told him that the railroad needed a lawyer in Paducah to handle their business. So he moved to Paducah. Said he liked it. All he did was walk around and look for something for several years, because all he ever did was defend one grass fire down here for the railroad. However, Mr. Waller was active in civil, and by the way, his practice did flourish after a year or two, but he was very active in, I can't get finished in 10 minutes. He was very active in civil affairs. During the 37 flood, him and one of his compadres down there, W.F. McMurray, and one of the preachers in town decided somebody was going to have to help these people out. So they commandeered a car, drove over to Mayfield, and sent the first wire to Washington to to Alvin Barkley, telling him what was going on. They pretty well kept the lines hot all day long. And when they came back, they confiscated a couple of buildings and started setting them up, putting beds and places for people to eat in it, and a lot of the own money was used for that. Also, they had no idea whether or not they were going to get their money back or just have to take bankruptcy when it was all over with. But after the 37 flood, or right about that same time, I should say, him and some of his other buddies decided that Paducah really needed a place of higher education. So they got their heads together and came up with Paducah Junior College, which is why I've got that jacket sitting over there. And they started looking for teachers. Well, this was right about the time the Depression was kind of lingering on and people in Chicago were still standing in soup lines. So Mr. Waller and one or two more of his friends drove to Chicago, went to look in the soup lines and found the people with the master's degrees and the doctor's degrees, and instead of giving them a bowl of soup, they offered them a job in Paducah, which was not hard to convince somebody whenever you don't have a job at all. So they went for a long ways on that. We are going to, I use it in a generic term because I'm going to run out of time. I want to get to this guy. Who knows him?
Shay Nichols.
You did pretty good. That is Mr. Shay Nichols. You recognize Shay in his scout uniform?
Oh, my goodness.
He was made it to Eagle Scout. I got one rank below Eagle when I discovered the female sect, and that was as far as I got. And right there is what Shay looks like right now. That boy was born with a natural curiosity, and he was raised to believe in the difference of good and not good, and he has been an appellate judge for this district for many years. Really good guy. I'll show you one more. Anybody recognize him? That is Eugene Catterjohn. If you look over on Cowell Street, the Catterjohn drugstore is still over there. He was the original Catterjohn for that place over there. His son, Kenneth Catterjohn, came along later and also was a pharmacist. And his son, Kyle, last time I was over there, was still working as a pharmacy in there. And the family lived in that really nice looking house that's right next to it. Did y'all ever invest in an electric railroad?
Never did get built.
That was one of the things that Mr. Colonel Henry, I can't pronounce his middle name, Rhodes, wanted to get going for Paducah. He said it was an absolute necessary thing, and he was trying to sell these bonds and talk about how great they were. And I'm only telling you that because he was the Rhodes of Rhodes Burfords, who used to sit on 4th Street right next to where the bank is, the U.S. bank's at right now. And my grandmother used to buy all of her furniture there. She thought that was the only place to buy furniture. They had a big cage in the back corner of that place. You'd go back there and make your weekly payments for your furniture. And that was the man right there. And by the way, I don't know how you actually segue from being a cowboy out west for 7 years and then moving to Paducah and opening up a a furniture store, but that guy right there did it. That was absolutely amazing. Our next guy, and I won't get through their family at all, but is the Rudy family. Most of us know the Rudy family. And I want to show you this before we get too far along. That was one of their ads. Rudy's has it. That is Richard Rudy. He was one of the Rudys. The Rudys were forever putting out Advertising, that's a rougher looking Rudy. There was Henry. I think Henry was the last one to be running that. And right there is Rudy's sheet music. The Follies of 1927. They drew people in down there. They had a fashion show. They listed all the women who were going to model all the stuff that was down there. Any place you wanted to look, Rudy's would have it. They would close up their store windows before Christmas every year, black them out, and then they would hire somebody from Macy's to come down here, decorate the windows, and then one night when everybody knew the date of, they would stand in front of the windows. The Rudy's would turn on lights all over the place, and they would pull down the dark curtains, and there would be all the fantastic stuff from New York. Whew! How'd I do? Did I get there? Okay. That was amazing. I didn't think I'd make it. If you've got any questions that I can answer, don't ask me a question that I can't answer. Make me look bad. But if y'all got any questions, we're getting ready to be through with this program. Yes, ma'am.
What is that little contraption right there?
That is a tobacco cutter. It was in most all general stores, and this is one that I have just picked up here lately. And I like to have a fit when I saw it because I was afraid somebody would get to it before I could. This was the Wilson Butts Company of Paducah. Y'all remember them? They were wholesale grocery right there at 11th and Kentucky, where the Livingston brothers had their grocery for a long time. That's a tobacco cutter, though. You bring that up to the counter, you lay a plug of tobacco across here, and tell the guy I want 1 mark, 2 marks, whatever. He'd lay it down there, bring it down like that, and you'd have your chaw of tobacco cut off of there. Okay, thank you for asking something I knew. Anybody else? Anybody else got?
Mary's last name, Lisa calls you Mary. What was her last name?
Wheeler, yes. Any other questions in here? Don't ask me something I can't
Where do
answer.
you keep your collection?
Huh?
I mean, do you have a home and this is like all over your house, or?
Oh, well, this is just a small piddling of what's
I
in
mean, you
it.
just got
Yes,
display.
yes,
Okay.
yeah. My wife has told me many times how much I got too much of it, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
When William Clark laid out the city in 1828, and there were people already living here, I understand. Is that right?
Yes.
What happened to those people? Did they stay, or did they have to leave, or?
No, they just had to conform to the way the city was laid out, and there was even some government offices that had to be moved that they built, and when they laid the streets out, they were sitting right in the middle of the street, so they made them move them, you know.